So welcome to this webinar. I appreciate people joining this morning. And I will really be talking about wearable technologies. Microneedles will be included. Sweat sensing will be included. Transdermal sensing will be included. And I'll talk about a few case studies and a little bit of history on microneedles as well. With that said, I will definitely go forward now and say welcome to this webinar. I will talk about electronics as well, and at least things that we do at ZP. Of course, wearables is it's one of these technologies that's been a long time, I don't want to say coming, but it definitely has been a long time coming. People have been working on this since approximately 2000. Well, before that, I mean, the first glucose sensor was, I think, reported by, or glucose sensor, I should say, CGM, continuous glucose monitor, was reported by George Wilson in the early 90s. So at this point now, that's a kind of getting close to 30 years. And then things like the Gluco watch, which you may have heard of, was actually being worked on in pre-2000s. But let me go forward and say I won't talk about ZP too much. I will talk about trends in the market. You know, when I say trends in the market, what I mean by that is that, you know, miniaturization and point of care have definitely become much more of a an accepted technology, and we will discuss that. I'll talk about cloud connectivity. So a lot of things that we do at ZP are, you know, intrinsically cloud connected. I will talk about the different configurations. This, I must admit, when I think about what I'm talking about today, I will talk about you know, I could talk about potassium in sweat for dialysis. We could talk about lactate in sweat for athletes. But you know, the elephant in the corner whenever talking about CGM or continuous glucose monitoring is really, sorry, whenever talking about wearables, it does come down to glucose because it's such a big market. But I'll give some case studies of implanted sensors, microneedles, reverse iontophoresis, which was patents have recently come off, or rather this technology has recently come off patent. So there was a little bit of a scramble a few years ago. I'll also talk about completely non-invasive technologies as well. And maybe I'll just comment upon, you know, non-invasive technologies are also being developed by companies such as Apple. So when I say, why are we here? At ZP, a lot of what we do is glucose based, but what you'll see from our technology portfolio that it's not just glucose. You will see that you know, we do lactate, sodium, potassium, pH, all sorts of technologies, but a lot of this sort of wearable technology that at least at ZP that we're interested in is really come from is really a translation of technologies that you would otherwise use for monitoring diabetics. These are electrochemical sensors, have really been translated into these kind of wearable technologies here. So I actually have a couple of things here. I mean, so you'll be familiar with, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with the Abbott. This is the Abbott Libre or Abbott Freestyle Libre 2. They do have a smaller version today, and I know that there's a lot of interest in people using it outside of the diabetes space. I'm not sure that this will necessarily in the long run grab traction. I think the idea of actually people monitoring themselves will gain traction, but with these sort of transdermal sensors, I'm not entirely sure that this will be the right platform for it. But credit to Abbott, they've definitely kind of helped create that kind of market that people are interested in monitoring their glucose. As I say, you know, this whole sort of blood glucose technology really started with CGM, oh, sorry, with blood glucose strips. So I'll just do a quick. I'm just going to prick my finger just very quickly here. One of the nice things about electrochemical as a modality for either wearables or for electrochemical or for blood analysis is actually it's quite a robust technology. So I've just recorded myself here. I've just recorded 100 milligrams per DL. So it's just demonstrates to you that electrochemistry is a technology for doing rapid test. Now, admittedly, that's an IVD test, but that kind of IVD testing is also, so we've gone from electrochemical blood glucose strips now to electrochemical wearables. So the technology has translated across quite readily. So I do think that electrochemistry is a good technology, whether you're doing IVD or whether you're doing wearables. Now, admittedly, I am biased because obviously I have a bit of a background in electrochemistry. I won't talk too much about the ZP team today. I think this is really a webinar for information, but we've been around. We're ISO 13485, and we're really being part of this whole decentralization. So when I say decentralization, obviously everything is progressing from being large instruments down to being small wearable, let's say, devices. And so at ZP, we're definitely playing in the sort of space of wearables and palm size and handheld type instruments. So miniaturization has been really important to us. Now we do have a couple of platforms at ZP that actually, if somebody came to us and said, I really want to make an IVD, an in vitro diagnostic, and I want to do it really rapidly, and I want to get to market in less than 2 years, then we definitely have a platform for that. That's called Sense It All. And then with time now, we are also translating that capability over to the wearable space as well. The whole sort of business model at ZP is really to get clients and customers to market in the fastest possible route. And so it is, if you're ever thinking about a roadmap, and when I say a roadmap, if you're ever thinking about, how am I going to get to market, it is easier to do it in the IVD than it is to do it in wearables. I can see the list of participants or attendees here today. So I know that one of you, for example, knows this extremely well, that wearables is much tougher than IVD. So I always say to people, if you've got the choice between doing wearable or doing IVD, in vitro diagnostics, then I would always choose the IVD route. Not because I wasn't going to eventually do wearables, but you can get to market, you can start proving out parts of your technology stack earlier on rather than later. But at ZP, we do have what we call an OEM, an original equipment manufacturing technology stack, which is kind of designed, that you've got the hardware. And when I sort of say hardware, I've got some hardware in front of me now. I've got some what we call the Sense It All platform. I will be also, I'm just going to take these out their packaging, but I'll also talk about these watches as well in a bit. These watches are essentially got microneedles on the back of them. So this will be something that I talk about shortly. But we do have essentially two pretty good platforms at ZP. One of them is the IVD platform, and the other one is the wearables platform. And I will discuss those in detail. But that said, whether you're wearables or whether you're IVD, at ZP, we definitely have apps that are already available on the App Store or the Google Play Store, and I'll discuss that in a bit. And those apps are already talking to our cloud system, so that at ZP, we do a lot of work at the moment. We're doing a lot of work in the veterinary space, and every time we make a measurement in a continuous manner, then we're saving the data to the cloud, and I will expand on that as well. And because we live in a modern age, when I say a modern age, much of what we do today is actually about APIs, different cloud systems talking to one another. So if you're, I think the future of wearables is actually lots of companies using platform technologies and using API, application program interface, in order to make their technology talk to third-party clouds. And that will then allow people to build business models based on the data coming from other systems. Now, when you look at Abbott with their Abbott Freestyle Libre 2, and you see lots of people selling wellness apps, I'm talking about wellness, then basically they're allowing their wellness apps to work with the Abbott platform through API. And at ZP, we also have an API in place, and an API technology as well. So these are things that exist. We have this hardware, we have the sensors, we have the apps, and we have the cloud, and we have an API in place as well. As I say, now, because you've attended this webinar, I'll put this video out later on. so you can do this later on. But you'll see that, in fact, some of what I'm talking about, when I say talking about, we're really trying to accelerate people to market. So these apps actually exist on the Google Play Store today. So there's a certain amount of deployment. And if you're on an iOS phone from Apple, then there's also an app on the Apple App Store as well. And with time, now at the moment, we've put some of the analytes or some of the tests that we have, they have these QR codes associated with them. So the two previous slides were showing you essentially where to get the app, and then these QR codes, I may just change screen just for a second, but in front of me I have some QR codes, which is really reflecting what's on the screen. So with my phone, every time I scan a QR code, I can essentially change the target for my technology. So I can just scan different QR codes. That will change the analyte or target of the app, and the app is what drives the hardware in a bit. So you can see that even though I might talk about glucose and lactate today, we can actually go between these two things quite readily just by using a QR code. So we do have all these QR codes. You can run this as a demo for yourself later on. Later on, what you can do is you can install the Sensi All app either off the Google Store or off the Apple Store, and then actually you can use these QR codes. You can scan these and actually see that you can go from analyte to analyte. Now, ZP, we are extremely collaborative, but we essentially collaborate with third-party companies that are well funded. So we do have a QR code here. It says kind of your, and what your means in this context is if I scan the yours QR code, it's a blank app basically, and it allows people to bring their own brands in, their own sensors in, their own assays in. So it allows them to essentially use our platform and our distribution, but for it to actually bring ZP into the background. And so, we do understand that if you're trying to be a technology platform, then you can't necessarily be the lead in terms of brand and customer facing. You actually have to, of course, make room for other people. All right. Well, I'll go a little bit faster because I appreciate that time is important. But for example, the way this technology platform works is, first of all, you need to install the app on your smart device. Then you can use these different QR codes. And so what the app will do is it will say, okay, what's the QR code you're scanning? In this case, it'll be pH. So that now means that the app is really ready to do pH. And it will tell the hardware, either the wearable platform or the IVD platform, this is a pH. And we have to use, of course, a correct sensor with it. For every analyte, there's a particular sensor. With this platform, the platform is standard in terms of the hardware, the distributed app, and the cloud system. But the things that do change are the QR codes and the sensors. The QR codes tell the hardware what to do, and the sensors are specific to each particular analyte. So we have one for pH. If you scan nitrate, there's a nitrate sensor, and then there's a nitrate QR code. If you do total antioxidative capacity, there's a total antioxidative capacity QR code, and there's a total antioxidative capacity sensor as well. For those who are interested in wearables for wellness, for example, and I would think that total antioxidative capacity is not a bad wellness measurement. It's not something that people talk a lot about, but knowing the kind of redox state of somebody can tell you about their ability to fight diseases. I don't want to stretch it too far, but they say that kind of being high in antioxidants does protect you against stress, etc. Glucose, classic. So I'll skip quickly over glucose, but glucose is up there. We have potassium. Potassium is really interesting in the wearable space. I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of people sort of receiving dialysis treatment at the moment. The way patients are scheduled for dialysis treatment is a little bit calendar based, and correctly so maybe. But in fact, if you are very controlled in terms of your lifestyle, then you may not need dialysis at quite the same rate. So it'd be nice to be able to measure whether somebody needs dialysis or not on potassium. Capsaicin seems like it's completely out of field here, but even capsaicin is a topical treatment in treating things like arthritis. So it may be nice to monitor capsaicin actually in the skin because it is a topical treatment for the skin. Ginger, I wouldn't say so, but we do have these abilities to also do other people's technology as well. Now, the app is, I might just change to my screen just for a second. It's the app is actually in Bluetooth connection with the device, for example, and the app is what tells the device what sensor is being dealt with at any particular time. And then the app, so the app essentially programs the hardware, and the hardware gives the data back to the app, and the apps then are sending the data to Julie, and people get results on their phone, which they're very interested in. But the really nice thing as well is that actually all the data is automatically sent to the cloud, so that we can at ZP always retrieve raw signals wherever they're actually, let's say, wherever they're actually gathered. And the nice thing is then we can interrogate it, or you can interrogate it. And there's also, as I say, the Julie has this inbuilt API, application program interface. As I say, even some of the obvious things for doing wearable sensors, well, I say, pH is, is I think one of the most measured chemical parameters in the world. Even the pH of skin is the pH of healthy skin, I think, is about 5.5. Whether somebody's got an infection or some sort of disease, the pH can shift away from it. Glucose, with glucose, I'll talk about the FDA at the moment. The FDA does require that you actually break the skin. So doing non-invasive glucose monitoring is something I will discuss. I wouldn't necessarily advise it. Potassium measurement is also something that isn't done today, but there are plenty of people who are interested in doing potassium measurements. As I mentioned earlier on, we've got analytes out there like capsaicin, which you think would be completely crazy in a conversation about wearables. But actually, I mean, diabetes, sorry, not diabetes, but arthritis, I suspect, is easily within the top 10 of chronic diseases in the world. And actually, it is treated with topical lotions that actually contain capsaicin. So there is a way to monitor how much capsaicin somebody's like applying to their skin, etc. We do have a whole range of electrochemical sensors. All of these sensors, and we just had some really nice work. We just did some really nice work recently on ketones as well. We made a non-oxygen dependent ketone sensor, and we've made a non-oxygen dependent lactate sensor. People are very interested in those. And of course, we have our glucose sensors. So lots of our sensors also have an application into the wearable space as well. And so we're quite happy to translate those across. The hardware and the sensors that we use, that several of you may know ZP already, but amperometry is obviously a technique that's used a lot where we measure the voltage. Voltammetry is not necessarily used a lot in wearables, but actually I think that's to the detriment. I think people should be using voltammetry a lot. We do use voltammetry in many of our assays. Our electronics platforms allow it, and our data or our signal extraction software definitely allows for it. There's a lot more information in voltammetry than there is in amperometry. Potentiometry, we do make potentiometric sensors. The potassium sensor that we make is potentiometric. The sodium sensor we make is potentiometric. The pH sensor, we actually have a non-potentiometric pH sensor, and I actually think that's a bonus because potentiometry is a bit like amperometry. You just get a number as a function of time, and it's not very feature rich. We live in an era of AI, artificial intelligence, and people want, if you give data scientists features and these features track with concentration of analyte, they can do a lot of good for you. But when you just give them a number as a function of time, it's it's almost zero features, so giving people voltammetry is always a good idea. Impedance spectroscopy also falls into that category of voltammetry as well. It's very data rich. We do have our own set of electronics at ZP, and we're very used to actually putting our sensors into many form factors. So at ZP, we do have technologies. You'll see this in a minute of transdermal. if you were trying to make what I call a Me Too glucose sensor, like Abbott, Medtronic, or Dexcom, then these sort of transdermal wire sensors are very useful, or not very useful. This is the way they do it. There's companies out there from Australia to California and Europe doing microneedles. At ZP, we have a patent portfolio of about 50 patents around microneedles, and I'll discuss that in a short while. We have basically two tiers of technologies that we put on the website, and then technologies for microneedles that are exclusive only to large clients. So if you can see my camera and me at the moment, I have this kind of patch that fits on the back of this smartphone, and this patch has lots of microneedles on it. So that's not something that we would put on the web store, but we do have it. We've definitely done a lot of work in the sweat space, and I will discuss that. We've also do a lot of work on implantables. There's only one implantable biosensor on the market at the moment. At ZP, we're mostly working in animals at the moment on implanted, and I will talk about that. So we've got lots of components, and one of the kind of spaces that people are very interested in is the sweat space. So the little video here, we have a kit on our website which shows people how to, or it gives you the materials and gives people the capability of actually constructing sweat sensors. So ZP, our whole business model is not to be that company that's facing the market. I don't think that's really a fit for us. We're more of a technology business, but we do have electrodes and sensors. We do have, for example, kits to make microfluidics that can fit onto the skin and use to wick sweat. We obviously have electronics. We have electronics that are more suitable for handheld devices, and electronics that are much more suited to wearable sensors. And of course, we do have the app. So don't forget, I'll send you out this video afterwards. And in this video, then you'll be able to find those QR codes, and you'll be able to have a little play with those apps. And those apps are actually talking to a cloud system called Julie, where we are very good at crunching electrochemical data. Just because the electronics have got smaller, this is real glucose data, but just because the electronics got smaller, it didn't necessarily mean that there's any degradation in the performance of the electronics. In fact, when I say our IVD technology, I'll just slightly change screens. So let's say I've got a piece of technology for measuring on the bench top. The electronics, essentially, or the analog front end in that is the same as the analog front end that we would put into the wearable sensors as well. So there's, as you can appreciate, it's kind of very translatable. What we're doing in IVD is then very translatable to what we do with clients in wearables. I just wanted to touch on lactate just really quickly. So I was just talking about sweat sensing and the way we do components. We did put these components together and actually do a quick lactate test. This was sort of several years ago now. And so we sort of, put a guy on an exercise bike. We put a electronics, one of those sweat patches, and a lactate sensor on him. And I wasn't really expecting much of a success, but we did have a Bluetooth connection. In this case, this was a few years ago. It was to the laptop. And we actually did get a profile for this person of lactate concentrations versus time. And it was really interesting, actually, because I wasn't having a big expectation on success, but we really did get a good signal. And it's very interesting the way we got this kind of dip in our signal after a certain amount of time. And I was looking, and I know some of you will have connections into people like Joseph Wang, and I was looking at one of Joseph Wang's papers, and he had the exactly same dip in his data, and I've seen this several times now. And the nice thing about having this kind of role is that I was talking to a doctor, and he said, "Oh yeah, that dip is due to this glucagon around, I think he said, the liver. There's actually a secondary power energy source that kind of kicks in, and so you go into this kind of lactate zone, let's say, or this anaerobic zone, and then you get this glucagon shot, and the lactate actually goes down, and then it comes back again." It was exactly the same as in some of the papers that I've read online. So I was really intrigued by that. I'm going to talk about some case studies now. So I'm going to talk about a couple of these are actually ZP case studies, but and then one of them is when I say implanted, I've got three to talk about when it comes to implanted. I'll also talk about microneedles, and I'll also talk about non-invasive, and then I'll do a quick summary. So something that we're very interested in at ZP is this is a implanted sensor I think I've got some scales here. So this is 15 millimeters by 38 millimeters. This is a complete sensing package. I know that some of you will have backgrounds in industry, so you can appreciate, you know, the millions it actually costs just to make something as simple as this. But, you know, here we have, you know, the CGM sensor. Here we have the electronics, the power supply, and the telemetry system. And we've functionalized it to be either glucose or cortisol. And as I say, we have the way of getting the energy out. We are making a generation 2 on this at the moment as well, but this was generation 1. The sensor package, it sounds a little crazy, but some of you may be already aware of this, but this fish is not dead. This fish is just anesthetized, which who would have thought that was a thing? But actually, you can anesthetize these fish. The package goes into the fish, and then the fish is sutured back up. And these fish, then these fish have got the sensing packages within them. They're obviously not aware of that, but they're both obviously survived the operation, and they've both got these packages within them. So I think at ZP, and maybe to yourselves as well, is actually, you know, this is a very hard application to, you know, face. I would even suggest it's harder than trying to do mammals on the ground, because actually, you know, the fish are in the water, and it gives us a new level of complexity. But you can implant sensors in fish. We were getting data out then when we gave them a glucose challenge. The fish glucose responded accordingly. So it is nice when this stuff works. And even today, I find it kind of, I wouldn't say surprising, because, you know, I did start with CGMs easily over a decade ago, but, you know, the technology is quite robust. And then now it's more about exploring new form factors. When I say new form factors, you know, microneedles, less invasive kind of technologies, and new applications. You know, the human space is very busy, and there are other places to, let's say, go and play. We are broadening out a little bit. So this is kind of more recent work where the pig is anesthetized, but it's certainly not dead. And we are able to put CGMs implanted into these pigs. And before the pigs actually went on study, you know, getting, you know, 6 days seems a little short for an implantable, but we were just checking that these sensors would actually function before we went and put them in the pigs, and they did function. I was going to do 3 examples underneath implanted sensors. So I did want to give an honorary mention to Sensionics. This is Tim Goodnow, the CEO of Sensionics. Sensionics has been around for a long time, by the way. The version of Sensionics, if you're aware of them, that you see today with Tim at the helm, is not the version that I first became aware of several years ago, but they have implanted a sensor. I did mention the word electrochemistry earlier on, and much of what we do at ZP is definitely electrochemical, but they actually are using fluorescence, and they implant it. I know that they got kind of FDA approval for 3 months, which extended to 6 months, which may have even extended to 12 months at the moment. So that you have to apparently prick your finger twice a day. This is probably a calibration routine. And I think it is, I was lucky enough to handle one of these packages. This is a photograph we took. And this gives you a scale. This is like, you know, so you can see the sensor. It's quite hard to remove. And I think it's the fibrosis. The body sees this as a foreign object. So I think on the academic side, if people are interested in getting involved in implantable sensors, stopping the fibrosis would be a really good, let's say, area to work upon. Microneedles, this is a technology that I have here at the moment. So at ZP, it's in the public domain. There was a large well, not large, they were a well-funded company called PK Vitality. PK developed some microneedle technology. I quite like microneedle technology. I said earlier on that, you know, to get into the wellness and healthness space, I've got a feeling for the majority of people, if you're going to be giving them metabolic sensors for their personal health, I think microneedles is probably the right platform for that, because it's a lot less invasive than transdermal sensors. Transdermal sensors are kind of repositioning medical products, whereas if you really want to get technology that are going to be adopted by consumers, then you really need technologies that are sort of less invasive, easy to put on, nice thing about microneedles as well is I'm not going to, it at least holds a promise one day of actually being able to take these microneedles on and off. I'm not mentioning BioLink, I must admit, in this talk, but BioLink is also a company. You've got companies in San Diego like BioLink. You've obviously got guys also who have licensed out of University College San Diego on microneedle. So there's a few companies working on microneedle technology, and I do think it offers a good, let's say, platform for people who are interested in getting into the wellness and health space. Because I mean, these are good technologies, but you know, the Abbott Freestyle Libre 2, it's very hard to see, but it does have this very fine filament, and this whole technology has to kind of be applied into the body. In fact, I do have an applicator here. It's actually in the, I do have an applicator, but there's a lot of plastic involved with applying the transdermal sensors, which you don't get when you're dealing with the microneedles. Microneedles, you can sort of put them in with the pressure from a watch strap or something like that. So I'm a bit more of a believer, let's say, in if you're going to hit mass market, then I think microneedles is essentially a better technology for it. Just want to make a quick comment, actually. I mean, this is a webinar about wearables, and I have sort of discussed that, you know, we've done work on lactate, we've done work on cortisol, we've definitely done work on potassium, but I want to sort of, you know, it does always come back to glucose. Why? Because today that market's, at least the continuous glucose monitoring market's worth 10 billion. Just in the UK, the National Health Service has just authorized the use of CGM, continuous glucose monitoring, with insulin pumps. When you connect a glucose meter with an insulin pump, you would describe that as the artificial pancreas. So there's definitely this kind of momentum now that CGM is probably going to start replacing blood glucose monitoring. I think you get a higher quality of data. But the FDA are aware that, at least when I was looking around Christmas time on Amazon, you get plenty of smartwatches sort of describing themselves as glucose watches. And the FDA, I think, got a little bit tired of this and sort of, you know, put out a specific sort of warning saying, be really careful of smartwatches or smart rings that claim to measure blood glucose without piercing the skin. So without piercing the skin would be the kind of holy grail of, you know, non-invasive glucose monitoring. The idea, or the company that does it, you know, could have a massive valuation. But the FDA has actually come out and said, you know, that these are really not medical devices. I don't think they've said they don't necessarily work, but I think they would, you know, they're not FDA approved, and they haven't been clinically proven to work. I do want to talk about the history of non-invasive glucose monitoring. Maybe I'll use Cygnus. Cygnus did the Gluco Watch, and Pentra. Pentra did a non-invasive, ironically using impedance spectroscopy technology for measuring glucose. Cygnus used a technology called reverse iontophoresis, so I will mention those. And then I'll also just mention Apple briefly. Apple have been working on continuous glucose monitoring, I would say, easily since about 2010. And I'll talk about some of their technologies as well. So Cygnus, some people have heard of it, some people have not heard it. Anyone who's worked in CGM for any kind of time should or will have come across them. So there we are. They were approved by the FDA in 1999. It was worn on the wrist, a reading every 20 minutes. I will comment upon that. And then it has a wearing time of 12 hours. And up to 3 hours warm-up time. So possibly it had a useful work time of 9 hours. So you've got to, and it does require frequent finger stick testing as well. So it's sort of, you know, when you're doing your kind of assessment of your technology, obviously, if you're trying to replace a blood glucose strip with a continuous monitor, then you would want to be able to kind of have, you know, a good continuous data stream. You would like the idea that you were getting more than 9 hours worth of useful life out of it, and you would basically want to eliminate the use of the glucose strip. But this actually, when I say this is not the Gluco watch, but the Gluco watch did require frequent calibration. So it didn't really save the diabetic a lot of effort, let's say. And people don't like alarms. So alarms are just, when something's not working correctly, and it's giving you too many alarms. People get alarm fatigue. So no criticism. The thing about Gluco watch and the company Cygnus, they were trailblazers, effectively. I mean, don't forget, this is 1999 we're talking about here. This is even pre cloud technology. AI was something that happened in the computer sciences department or the computer sciences department at universities. Not even the BlackBerry, which was the original sort of smartphone, was around in those days. So anyway, they were doing reverse iontophoresis. Essentially, you put electrodes on the skin, and you try to draw the ions out of the skin by the application of voltage and the passing of current. I'll discuss that in a minute. And these ions are meant to then drag the glucose with it. If you've got a background in electrochemistry, you can sort of look at the electrode layout and sort of see that there's possibly, and it says it here as well, that there's at least two circuits involved here, one for applying the voltage and passing current, and one for then measuring the glucose signal. I think they were using a generation 1 glucose sensor. At ZP, we have generation 2 glucose sensors. We also have non-oxygen versions of glucose sensors as well. The way it works is it's very hard these days to actually find images online actually of the Gluco watch. I think the internet you have to go quite deep in. It's starting to forget about the Gluco watch. But there used to be some pictures online where you would actually see people's skin quite blistered by the Gluco watch. And there's no criticism of the Gluco watch. It was an early, these were trailblazers, setting the foundations for what we have today. But the way the watch was actually working is it was passing quite a lot of current for approximately 3 minutes using applying 1.5 volts to the skin is fairly high, and 0.3 milliamps per centimeter squared. And when I look at the size of the electrode, they're probably passing about 0.3 milliamps. 0.3 milliamps is quite a lot of current. So I think that was part of their problem. What they were doing is they were essentially extracting the sample through reverse iontophoresis, and then they were measuring for 7 minutes. So they're basically integrating the signal over time. And then they would reverse the polarity and do it again. So they basically had two glucose sensors on there. They would extract and read, and then they would reverse the voltage and extract and read on the other one. And then they were actually, I think they were extracting glucose in the concentration of 50 picomolar to 200 picomolar. Anyone who's working in sort of fluid knows that it's in the millimolar. So they were really not extracting that much material. And that's probably why they had 7 minutes worth of, let's say, averaging of that particular signal. And they, as I say, they would actually have this, they would read, they would extract and read, and then extract and read, and they'd end up actually averaging the two signals. But of course, if anyone's on a glucose, if their glucose is going down, and you read the glucose at 2 time periods, then you'll end up with 2 different values. And if you just don't weight those, you just sort of said, right, well, I'll take that number and average them, then you will end up with, in this particular case, a calculated glucose of maybe 7.3 millimolar. But of course, at the actual time, it may actually be 6 millimolar. So you kind of inherently got an error in there. So I bring that up because it is worth having a encyclopedic knowledge of what's happened in the past when thinking about new technologies, because you do want to avoid or learn, there's nothing like, if you don't learn or understand what's happened in the past, you will end up repeating the mistakes of the past. So you sure won't repeat that, let's say, error. And then I did look online and see that people said that it was the warm-up period was too long, 3 hours. It was itchy. The itchy was that skin irritation. Some people complained about inaccuracy, but most of the user experience was the warm-up period and the painfulness or the itchiness of it. Now, Pendra was something that's not so well known in the glucose space, but actually it was CE approved in 2003. It went onto the Dutch market. When I say the difference with SMBG, so if you measure your blood glucose by SMBG and you measure your blood glucose on the Pendragon, well, the Pendragon was measuring the interstitial fluid, but they would have a difference of 52%. It's quite significant. Their correlation ideal correlation is 100%. So 35% correlation between what we call the reference, which would be blood glucose in this case, and the Pendragon was quite high. And then it was also, if you've not heard of the Clark error grid, then I would look it up, but it's all Clark error grid says some errors, you can have small errors and it'd be okay, but you can have big errors and it can be clinically really important. So you do not want errors in what we call zone E, and the zone E's here, but in fact they were about 5% of the time, let's say 4% of the time, actually having errors in these very critical zones. So it wasn't just the fact that they had errors, but they had errors in quite clinically relevant zones on the Clark error grid. So the Pendragon was actually essentially pulled from market. The way it was working was it was actually doing impedance spectroscopy or impedance, and they were basically measuring the sodium and then correlating the sodium with the glucose. So in life, you can have primary signals, secondary signals, tertiary signals. Primary signal, for example, if I had a sample of glucose and I measure that glucose directly, then that's my primary signal. But if I'm measuring glucose via something else, then that is secondary. So I feel like, they were at least a secondary signal. You could argue that they maybe were tertiary, but they had problems with temperature, moisture, and the perfusion and movement artifacts. I mean, anyone who's working on wearables knows all about movement artifacts in the sensor data. So they did have problems and they were pulled from the market. So they had sort of, I would almost describe that the fact that they had sensitivity to moisture and sweat means that the signal was fairly non-specific. Apple have been doing this for years. Apple would absolutely love to use the LEDs on the back of the watch to measure glucose. I mean, I think this started with the acquisition of IP from Rare Light in 2010. They've been working quietly with Rockley Photonics for absolute years. And then I saw in January, February 2023 that we're now working with TMSC. I don't have first-hand insight into what's happening at Apple, but following them for years on this. They are obviously, having read the patents, they are trying to use the infrared part of the spectrum. I think shortwave and medium wave infrared. The problem with glucose as a model is as a molecule is it does have strong signals in the infrared spectrum, both at what we call 3000 wave number, about 1000. But the problem then is that water also has these strong signals around about 3000. So you can understand that water, which is a massive constituent of the blood, is an interference molecule. Then I would imagine Apple were actually then using more like wavelengths at 1000, where you can see water is not so active. But then any common pharmaceutical, many proteins, small molecules all floating around the body will also have activity down here as well. So I'm pretty sure this is an active program at Apple, but they do suffer from water being 11,000 times more. If the blood glucose is at 5 millimolar, then the concentration of water in the blood is 55 molar. So that gives you a sort of noise to signal, or molecular noise to signal of at least 11,000 to 1. And then also you've got the quantum efficiency of interacting with photons, and water, for example, is quite efficient. So you've got another sort of quantum inefficiency as well. But of course, Apple also have one of the most highest evaluations in the world, and they are able to actually afford, let's say, the fight. So coming soon from ZP as well, is this is a technology that we'll be releasing really soon. This is a electronic set which can run electrochemical sensors, including lactate, potassium, sodium. If we needed to be doing things like immunoassays, then we would be able to do those kind of things as well. And then it's enabled with both Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. So at ZP, the whole business model is how can we get as many people to market as quickly as possible. Of course, it does leave people with the biggest problem of all, which is working out the business model and raising the money to actually, because it's never going to be low cost to bring either an IVD so even if the idea is to bring a new IVD assay to market, it's never going to be a low cost kind of effort. And if the idea is to bring a wearable, maybe microneedle based technology as well, like a CGM, that's also never going to be low cost. I just saw, just in one last comment, I mentioned BioLink earlier on. So BioLink are very active down in California, doing continuous glucose monitoring using microneedles. A couple of years ago, they had raised 100 million, and just in the last 3 to 4 weeks, they just raised something like another more than 50 million. So that's 150 million, so far. And previous to that, they've been around for 7 years, so a long time and a lot of money raised. And so, over 150 million raised so far. So it's probably just worth mentioning that, because people otherwise think that, they'll be able to get a few technologies and they're on the market, but it just doesn't work out that well. And even if you went into wellness, I still think it's hard sort of slog. So I'll just do a quick summary. Appreciate your time this morning. I wanted to be efficient with it. So, ZP, we've been around now. This is our 10th year. We do hold a patent portfolio of 50 patents on microneedles. We were always the biosensor developers for PK, PK Vitality, and went into liquidation. ZP bought the IP for that, and now we do use that technology and license that technology into paid client programs. We're definitely part of this movement from IVD, in vitro diagnostics, or rather decentralization of medicine, I should say. That's really what we're part of, which is, people no longer want to go to hospital, or should be going to hospitals, or those hospitals may not even have the capacity or even be in place for all this testing and monitoring of people. And now we live in a world of Internet of Things, Bluetooth, wireless, smart devices, miniaturized electronics. Then all of that allows us to actually be able to do what was otherwise the only hospital based, actually to come out and be wearable. As I say, you need this whole stack of technologies. Once upon a time, talking to people about putting data in the cloud, we can all talk about data cybersecurity. That is a different, it's a reported subject, but I'm just going to nod to cybersecurity as a concern. But the idea that we can measure something and the data can immediately go into the cloud don't have to explain that to people. There are lots of configurations for wearables, from transdermal, which is what Abbott Libre's Freestyle 2 is, to microneedles, which I'm wearing on my wrist at the moment, to sweat sensors, to implanted sensors, are all possible. At ZP, we do implanted sensors mostly in the veterinary space at the moment. Wearables, we do it with clients, especially mostly on microneedles. And then I just want to kind of remember, wearables and transdermal glucose monitoring has been around for quite some time. With iontophoresis, was tried, it had its problems. I think one of the problems is it's not so efficient extracting glucose. Pendra were trying to do this kind of secondary measurement of impedance and then tying impedance back to glucose. I think that it's the quality of that signal is probably a little problematic. And then there are definitely academic groups who are even trying to do this non-invasive measurement of glucose using optical spectroscopy techniques. And I would just sort of say that, your rivals in this space would be people like Apple, and they've put a considerable amount of money into this over the years. So I just want to say thank you. I realize that I've been speaking almost continuously for something like 51 minutes, but I do appreciate you attending this morning. My intention then is to, when this video is processed, and I will send you all out a copy on the video. But otherwise, I want to say thank you very much. And if you have any questions of ZP, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Okay, thanks very much.